Thanks everybody for joining us. I want to start with an issue we discussed a little bit before coming on stage, which is the government's role in fostering innovation. Supporters say we need funds into startup ecosystems to help startups get going. Critics say it can encourage startups that perhaps shouldn't survive to survive. Let's talk about what in your view, what is the proper government role? Cheryl, should we start with you? You're assisting the government in Malaysia, and you have an esteemed background in the startup world. Tell us a little bit about your experience in Malaysia.
Yeah, sure. So to answer your question on the government's role for encouraging or building startup ecosystems, I think if you look at Silicon Valley's history, 50 years in the making, even they had a lot of government support initially. And other ecosystems like Israel, here in Singapore, in Chile, a lot of them have government support. So I think it's actually important for government to be supportive and recognize the importance of the roles that startups and entrepreneurs play. The key question is how it's being executed, right? In Brad Feld's book, Startup Communities, if you've read it, one of the core elements he mentions in there is that startup communities have to be led by entrepreneurs themselves. And he sees the role of the government as a feeder, and that feeders should not be running the ecosystem. It's the community that should be running the ecosystem. So, and at Magic, which is a very newly found organization 2 months ago by the government of Malaysia, and I've been an entrepreneur all my life, so it's kind of an interesting intersection of that, which is why I came back and I moved back to Malaysia to take on this role, is because now can entrepreneurs then, in the government role, a government-funded and supportive role, actually lead the ecosystem and do what's right for the entrepreneurs, because it takes sort of an entrepreneur type person to recognize what are the challenges and barriers that needs to be removed in that environment, in a country, for them to actually flourish and be successful. So I think it's a fine line. I think the government can play a very important role, but you need the right people to run it.
Hi everybody, how are you doing? I think I came all the way from Brazil to talk with you guys about the startup ecosystem. And answering your question, I think the government role is to give education to the population, to people. And we have some programs of the government in Brazil that the government gives $100,000, $50,000 to startups. A lot of startups, 100, 200 startups a year in Brazil. But most of those startups get the money and throw away, because they don't have education, they don't have knowledge to get this money and do the right thing with it, So I think the most important thing that the government should have is education to the population.
I'm from Korea. I want to echo Cheryl a little bit. Korea, personally, I think that the government is doing a great job, relatively good job. Of course, there are some critics. I just want to explain how Korean government did. It is consisted of two parts, basically. One is sort of acting as an LP, investing in VCs. And I think that was a great move. It started from 2005. So every year the government, invests in VCs around $100 million to $300 million. So that enables VCs to make a bigger fund. So every year we raise around $1 billion fund. That's giving a seed money, because we lack, usually Asian countries lack, private sectors to invest in VCs. So that's a very good thing that I believe, and it aligns the interest for the private market. One thing that I'm less positive is, giving out grants to startups, because, for example, if there are some programs that you can get 100K to 300K as a grant for nothing, free money, we say. And due to that, there are some entrepreneurs just focusing to get that money and not really solving problems. And even though they're not performing very well, this is a little bit harsh statement, but in my perspective, I believe that they have to run out of business because that enables more talent distribution to the better place. But sometimes we call those kind of startups like zombie startups, because they're just keep going, even though they're not making something great. So that's not really healthy for the ecosystem. So rather than just pouring out money, I believe that the right support is going to be being as a feeder, being as like a seed investor, and make the private market lead the way.
And Jimmy, you mentioned the Korean government is unique in that it's encouraging startups to invest abroad. So they're not merely focused on Korea. Is that right?
Yes and no. And actually, during the past 2 or 3 years, the government is pushing a little bit more. They're giving some more incentives for startups, going abroad. Overall, I'm positive, but every policies has some side effects, because I personally believe that it's the statement that you have to go abroad is a wrong statement. There are gonna be some specific startups that should go abroad, and there are some startups that just focus on the market, local market. For example, let's say in this side there's gonna be some commerce or payment companies. This has to be local. It's really hard for them to go global. This side's gonna be like the social services. Still, it's a little bit controversial. For example, let's say that there's a Korean top tier engineers, 5 engineers heading to Silicon Valley, trying to build the next Facebook. I think it's gonna be a very tough job for them. And then this side, I think there's gonna be some gaming companies, and the right side is gonna be like hardcore technology. So for these 2 categories, maybe I think going global is a very good chance. But for these companies, I don't really think it's not a good thing. But I don't think that everybody has to go abroad, and the government has to push to go abroad. So there are some inefficiencies, because there are some people who want that money from the government and pretend that they're going abroad. But there is a movement, overall movement, that a lot of entrepreneurs are trying to aim the global market, at least the Asian market.
Casey, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the Hong Kong government's approach. They've taken a somewhat hands-off approach. Is that right?
Yes, definitely hands-off, as in no hands. But I like to think government involvement in startups is more of a validation than anything else. So that means the Korean government, Singaporean governments are saying, we believe in startups, so we're going to put some money into it and kind of support it, right? Even though, Samsung is in Korea, they're not actually doing it. It's the government that's getting behind it. So that's great. In Hong Kong, we have a history of every man for himself. So basically, it's like, Thunderdome from Mad Max. 2 men enter, 1 man leave. That's kind of what it is, right? I mean, if you heard Ray talk this morning about 9gag, he did everything himself, right? He didn't have any help from government. He went through 2 accelerators in the States, right? I think he went through Y Combinator, one of them twice. So he's hardcore, and if you really want to make it happen, you'll go out there and do it. There's no need to wait for government to come and help you. So other countries in the audience now, they're going, my government doesn't help me, like Singapore and Korea. Hey, get over it. Hong Kong has a lot of rich people, and they're not they have to be the ones that come and move it and push it forward, the private sector, not the government.
But is that good or bad? I mean, ultimately, would it be better if the Hong Kong government were encouraging startups, or does it actually produce startups that are leaner and meaner?
Yeah, so I think we had a discussion just before this about that, and it's going to be a cool, heated discussion about it, right? Because I think everybody has their own opinion. I think personally that in Singapore, if you can get money that easily, you're not that hungry, right? In Hong Kong, you can't get any money. You're going to go looking for that money. You're going to be hungry. You're going to find customers. You're going to make ways to make money as fast as possible. So that develops that kind of need. But at the same time, of course, if you're young, you need some money to get going. You need to validate yourself to your peers and your parents and things like that as well. So it's a chicken and egg. It's 2 different conversations of the same coin. But everybody else, back me up on this.
That's why I do agree with Antonio's opinion about government playing the education role, because I think that's missing. And when you look at encouraging the entire ecosystem, you have to look at the entire full stack of entrepreneurs from cradle to grave, the full life cycle. Because if you keep putting money into just one stack, and you forget about the follow-on capital, the smart money, the education, the talent that's needed for these startups to hire, and then exits play an important role too, to provide liquidity to early investors. Because if you fund only one track, then you have a leaky bucket somewhere, then you're putting money and it's all leaking, right? So you need to figure out, I think the government's role, whoever's building the community or ecosystems, can't just serve one stack of community. They have to look at the entire ecosystem and see where the gaps are, where are the holes that we should patch so that we get a sustainable ecosystem. And to his point about sort of private investments, I think the grants are a way to help the community see or help people see the value of startups, but eventually private partnerships need to come in. So even in Malaysia, we have lots of government grants. Cradle, one of the sponsors here, gives out government grants, but they're already starting to partner with private sectors, private VCs to come in and sort of lead the investment as what we were discussing.
Martin, you've looked at startups all over the world,
Yeah, correct.
particularly emerging or frontier markets. What's your take on government's role?
I think I have three words coming into my mind. The first one will be necessity, the second one is enforcement, and the third one is KPIs. I will tell you three stories from Nigeria, Kenya, and Lebanon. Necessity for government is because in these countries you have huge populations. In Nigeria, for instance, you have 10 million more people in the country every year. And entrepreneurship and innovation is almost the only way to get a job for these people. So in countries where the demographics is growing so fast, for government, it's a necessity to be there and to foster innovation. The second one, of course, is enforcement. You can have great ideas, but the idea is how you enforce them. In Kenya, for instance, they have rewritten the constitution in 2013, last year. And in this constitution, the government is saying that 30% of the public tenders, so, when they build anything for the country, should be given to startups founded by people below 25, or women, or disabled person, which is quite bold. But then again, how you enforce that, that's another question. And the third thing when it comes to government is really the KPIs, how you measure the effectiveness of all the money or all the ideas you put into an ecosystem. And this one is a story from Lebanon. So Lebanon is a very, very small country, 4 million people. And the central bank has recently given $400 million to the startup economy. So that's about 1% of their own GDP, which is just huge. I don't think they have so many entrepreneurs, to get this money. And when I was in Beirut a few months ago, we had this lady from the central bank, and she really admitted on stage that there were no KPIs for this money. The money would be given to banks. We know that banks are not, the most innovative and fast-forward thinking companies in the world. So how would they, as banks, fund a startup ecosystem in a very small country? That's a lot of questions. So I don't think it's like good or bad government, but it's more how do you put a frame, KPIs, milestones, so that there's a use to that, there's checkpoints, and when you need to revamp the strategy, you have times to do it.
On another issue, cultural issues, there's some people have told me in looking at different startup ecosystems around Southeast Asia that what they find lacking is a chronic lack of entrepreneurship, and that people don't want to take risks because maybe they come from a small family, they've gone to a top university, they want to get a great, secure, high-paying job. Why would they risk it all on a startup? Do you think that this issue is overplayed and perhaps overhyped, and that it's maybe a myth that things happen a certain way in Silicon Valley and that's just how things need to operate elsewhere? Or is this a real challenge? Do you, in your travels, do you encounter people who, frankly, just don't have the desire to risk it all on a startup the way we think that they should, or the way that it's happened in other places?
Well, of what I can say of countries where people live with less than $2 a day is that they have a lot of issues to solve. And, people say of African people that they are entrepreneur by birth because they need to solve a lot of things on water, environment, power cuts. So I think I had a conversation a year ago with someone in Singapore who told me that the problem with Singapore is that there's no problems to solve. I think it's true in the way that there is a lot of quality of life and everything. I think there's a lot of issues actually in Singapore. Actually I'm based in the Hub, which is a co-working space focusing on social entrepreneurship here in Singapore. And the founder, Grace Tsai, used to say that the problems you would like to solve in Singapore would be old age, because it's a graying country, and there's a lot of startups who should tackle this issue. There's happiness. Singapore, sorry guys, is often described as in the rankings like the country with the least emotions, with the least happiness. So there's probably something to solve about that. So I guess people should be hungry about these problems, because that's the problem of rich countries, developed countries, and honestly, the silver economy, it's really, really huge. So, if you want to do a startup, think of the gray guys, and you should have enough ideas and hunger.
Antonio, what do you find in Brazil? It's a enormous country with a huge population. A lot of potential in the economy. What's the spirit among entrepreneurs in your experience?
We have 210 million people in Brazil, and we have 120 million internet users in Brazil. And I see most of the people, like 95% in my opinion, do not want to leave their jobs to create a startup. They want to do both, work and create a startup at the same time. So they don't want to risk. It's a big challenge, to tell the people there that you must focus in your startup. You must focus in entrepreneurship if you want to create a successful business. And it's a very big challenge to do that. So 95% of the people in Brazil do both things, and they complain a lot about money. Even if we have the government money, they complain a lot with the money, and we don't have people, we don't have designers, we don't have people that can code my website. So they complain a lot of the people that don't have knowledge to create a startup with them. But they're wrong. What they need is time to create their own startups and core competence, talent to create their own startups. If they have that time and talent, they will create successful startups in Brazil.
Cheryl, how has this? Have you noticed the spirit change recently in Malaysia? You were mentioning that it seems like a lot of the startups are scattered between KL, Penang, elsewhere. What's been your experience in the last year or two? Is there a change in the mood there?
There's definitely a lot of, part of why I decided to uproot my life in the US and come back is because I saw that drive and that passion. There's a lot of ripe talent. In fact, five of the largest tech IPOs in the region comes from Malaysia, but none of you probably knew about that. We probably haven't done a good job of, sort of promoting our success stories and whatnot, and there are a lot of hidden talents all around. So I think, coming back to sort of the cultural issue, right? I think in Asia, obviously in schools, we've been taught to sort of not question authority. We're very good process-driven people. If you give us something, we'll do it really, really well. But I guess in schools, typically, we haven't been taught to be critical thinkers enough. It's changing a lot here. I've seen that a lot. But I think also the message of being an entrepreneur has to be changed. A lot of people are going to schools and saying, hey, you be an entrepreneur, choose entrepreneurship as a career track. But I'm like, how can you choose entrepreneurship as a career track? You don't just be an entrepreneur for entrepreneur's sake. And this is where you get the entrepreneurs who go for government grants, and this is kind of the raw mentality. We need to train them to be problem solvers. They need to have that drive. And I would argue, don't be an entrepreneur right away after college. Go into an industry, have that perspective of that expertise in a certain industry, and have that mindset of, okay, I've noticed in this industry there's these problems, I want to solve it, and I think I have the solution for it, and then you come out and be an entrepreneur. So I'm trying to kind of like turn it around, that don't encourage people to be entrepreneurs, encourage them to be problem solvers, and then you get your entrepreneurs.
Jimmy, I think I saw you mention earlier the proliferation of co-working spaces in Seoul. Is that accurate? Martin mentioned working at the hub. Are you finding that people are working together, collaborating, sharing space?
Yeah, there's a trend. Yeah, we were having a lot of co-working spaces in Seoul, and I think it's a positive thing. But I just want to mention a little bit more about your original question, which was, about the cultural issues and risk averse. I believe that this is a real issue. It's not a hype, and it's gonna take a lot of time to tackle this problem, I believe, because for the young entrepreneurs, I believe one of the biggest obstacles are actually their parents, because they have to persuade their parents that they're not going to Google Korea, Google China, Google whatever, and they're doing their own startup. And the only way to solve this problem, I believe, is to have some success stories, more examples, success examples, rather than, for example, there was like one government official asking me if can we boost up entrepreneurial spirit by making a mandatory course in every university teaching entrepreneurship. And I was like, I don't really think it's going to work within like 1 or 2 years, even though you do that. It's going to take like 5 years, 10 years, and you have to see a lot of success cases. And then you realize that maybe doing a startup is an option in my life, rather than, pushing the people doing a startup. So, and again, to the co-working spaces, I think it's a good thing, but a lot of things that I believe is that they're trying to copy some surface of Silicon Valley and bring it to Asia, rather than really tackling the real problem, which I just mentioned. For example, the risk-averse things and, thinking about the real problems.
Casey, we tend to think of Hong Kong as being an entrepreneurial place, or at least I do in terms of just general business development. Are there unique issues that you're finding there?
No. I mean, I think that Ray and the handful of startups that are here from Hong Kong on their own dime, no government grants, no subsidies, just come out here to check out what's going on. It just shows you that it's like, and everybody in this audience, so most of everybody here is an entrepreneur, right, or doing a startup. So I don't think if there's that thing. So I think you're right. It's more like a myth. I think if you're going to do it, you're going to do it. So I don't think that's the thing. But I believe you need a support group, right? So that's the thing, or an ecosystem. That's kind of why I started StartupsHK, is to have people meet in a coffee shop and talk to each other and grow and network. I think that's very important. I think what Echelon is doing here and all their satellites is good. Kind of sidestepping into the co-work space question as well. Some of you probably know Hong Kong has so many co-work spaces now, it's not even funny. There's almost a co-work space for every startup. Anyways, yeah. So, but the good idea about that is that people can get together and network. Each co-work space, good or bad, or contributing to the ecosystem or not, has definitely a different specific reach around it, right? The people that are there, the startups that are there, they're different in each one. They have different price ranges, they have different locations. They cater to different kinds of people, and I think that's really good to help grow, certain areas in startup world. So like there might be the mobile one, the game one, the expat one, the local guys one, they all have this kind of thing. And I think just, we were the only game in town. Now there's the pockets all over Hong Kong, which is fantastic. And I think that's what grows the ecosystem and grows the demand and the drive amongst the entrepreneurs that are there. Oh, there's a guy just like me. He's doing something too. Let's hang out. Let's have a coffee. Let's talk. I think that's how it grows. Not, and then, all the government money and all this other stuff we're talking about comes in, much, much later.
So it's really about the community. To the co-working space point, I mean, we may have like tens of co-working spaces, but if the community isn't there, and if you talk about Silicon Valley, and some of these questions are asking, what are we doing to create our own versions of Silicon Valleys, right? And I think throw that out of the window. We're not trying to create a Silicon Valley here. We have something perhaps even better than Silicon Valley. I don't agree with the whole copy and paste mentality. The reason why co-working spaces and communities are important is because if you look at Silicon Valley, what happens there is really a congregation of really smart, talented people in one area, like-minded people in one area. And when you're all in the same place and when you meet each other and you talk, that's where serendipity happens, right? Like, and you kind of exchange ideas and you share your ideas and you get feedback. You have challenges and you talk to someone about it that they could have the same challenges too, and you exchange these ideas. So that's why co-working spaces in places outside of the valley are meant to be that community building aspect of it. So, I would argue that that's one of the most important things, and that's what I'm trying to build in Malaysia as well. We do have pockets of people already. We do have communities, but if those communities are seen as competitive to each other, that's where it's unhealthy. It's okay to have different communities and different pockets of people and tons of co-working spaces, as long as it's sort of mutually building on each other for the better of the whole ecosystem.
I think that there's also a link between events and co-working spaces, because you can open a co-working space and just, open the doors and wait for people to come. But in countries where the government is pretty, I would say, not there, typically in like Africa and Middle East, or badly there, usually what happens is that people gather because they share the common interest, the common passion to build things, about like a given topic, like drones, for instance, or augmented reality. They meet, and after a few months, they say, wow, that would be cool, to meet somewhere else than in the local pub or the local bar, and then they try to look for a space. And what's happening here in Singapore for the maker community is quite amazing. So it's called SG Makers. I had a chat with them like 2 weeks ago, and honestly, they were able to put, about this size of like this chunk of people in one room. And I didn't know that, there were so much makers in Singapore. And William Hoy, who is the manager of this ecosystem, if we can say, told me that they would just congregate every month. So when they did the first event, people started to ask him, oh, when's the next event? And he answered, while there's no next event, it's just planned to be a one-off. And then they said, okay, so let's do it a regular one. So every month they would gather. After, I think, 1 year, they had like 200 members. And now, they just fill a room big like that, with 300 people interested in making things. And I think that the Arts and Science Museum in Singapore, which is the nice flower building on the Marina Bay here, they're giving the keys of the space to this community of makers so that they can do whatever they want for 20 days. I think it's in December. So it's interesting the way when people gather, they really, push the walls wherever they gather. And then when they create a co-working space or, a hacker space or a maker space, of course, the community is already there because the community is before the physical space. And I think that's quite the same with Dim Sum Labs in Hong Kong.
If we could just go briefly, I want to try to pin you down for the sake of the audience. If someone outside of Asia comes to you and says, where's the coolest place for startups in Asia? Now, I know coolest is a little bit of a subjective term, but I mean, where are they doing the most exciting stuff? Okay, so let's start with you. Just go down. Well, and you can name your own places if you want. It's okay.
Hong Kong, that's the best place. I just did a bunch of conferences last month, like startup conferences like this. And I liked Seoul a lot, Korea. So I thought that place was pretty interesting. A lot of the startups there were quite interesting. And the support's there. So I'd say keep your eyes on Seoul for sure as being a place that's out there. And this guy, what he's looking at, look what he's looking at.
Okay, thank you. I also travel a lot. I'm pretty positive in Seoul about, Korea. But I would recommend a lot of people here, if your whole team are foreigners, I would not suggest you to come to Korea. But if it's a pretty closed, community. But if you think you can do something, to join a startup or do some entrepreneurial thing, I think Korea is going to be a great place. One of the reasons is we have great infrastructure. Not only talking about the LTs and stuff, we have great, developers. Engineering team is, I believe, quite good within Asia compared to other countries. So there's going to be some opportunities, I believe.
So I'm going to be a bit more diplomatic here. I'm not going to name countries, but I'm going to say go where there is good healthy government support, because I think that's important as well for you to choose where you're going to be. Go where there is smart money. That's very, very important. But also go where there's talent that's affordable and talent that will actually help you grow your company. Because if you don't have these things, I would say more so the talent and the smart money, then your company is just not going to flourish.
And actually, the talents are where the universities are, the good universities, In Brazil, I think the best place to go is São Paulo. São Paulo, then Alagoas is doing a very good job as well. Rio de Janeiro, you all guys know Rio de Janeiro. Brasilia is have a good environment there as well. It's the capital of Brazil. Belo Horizonte, they have the San Pedro Valley there. But it's very nice. They are doing a very good job as well there. I think those places are the best place to go in Brazil if you're looking for a healthy ecosystem of startups.
I guess I will have one answer for Asia and one answer for the rest of the world. In Asia, I would go where the problems and the size are, and it's Indonesia. It's like 250 million size market. Of course, you have difference of languages. You have a broken government. You have maybe not as much talent as you would have in Singapore. But honestly, I'm dreaming every night of setting up a drone company in Indonesia. There's 18,000 islands. How would you want to connect e-commerce, except with drones? It's just huge. So I would definitely go there. And out of Asia, I think I have a crush on Lebanon because it's really a gateway between the Western world and the Eastern world. You have these like $400 million waiting for you guys if you launch a startup over there. So the money is definitely there, and there are a few amazing companies there, like Anghami, which is the Spotify of the Middle East, and because they have this diaspora, which I think is also a nice topic to talk about. If you are in Lebanon, you have a connection to Europe, to South America. I learned that actually there's a lot of Lebanese diaspora in South America. So yeah, that would be my two places, Jakarta and Beirut.
Okay, great. Let's turn to some questions from the audience here.
How many Malaysians are in the audience today? I think everybody, right? Cheryl's got all the questions.
Yeah. So here's the question for you, Cheryl. What was the big, capital B-I-G, reason for you to give up entrepreneurship to work for the government?
Who said I gave up entrepreneurship?
I'll let you defend yourself.
Once an entrepreneur, always an entrepreneur. I did not give up entrepreneurship. I saw, like I said, I think I saw the drive and a lot of opportunity. I think entrepreneurs go where there's an opportunity, where there's an opportunity to create impact and change. And so for me, I'm actually running Magic, even though it's a government-funded company. I'm running it like a startup, and I think the key thing here is I'm trying to experiment multiple different things. I started my company in New York, where it was during the financial crisis. So it was a financial hub that kind of within a few very short years turned into the second largest and bustling tech city in the country after the Valley. So being part of that community and seeing what the local New York community did was really interesting. So I've learned from there. I've been in the Valley. I've learned from there. I've studied all the ecosystems. So to me, this is like a big giant experiment for me that I'm trying to run and experiment different things and see what sticks. And I think we have to do that because, we're not trying to replicate Silicon Valley here. We have a very unique ecosystem in Southeast Asia. I almost have to throw out what I know about the Valley and try to build a very unique ecosystem here. But the key is, can you learn from the best? Can you learn from lessons across the world and create something that is unique to Southeast Asia?
Here's one. The question is, let's see, yeah. What are your thoughts on founders moving to different countries because of startup ecosystems? Should they rather focus on the problem they are solving from where they are? Martin, you kind of touched on this. Should people, this is an interesting question. If you're an aspiring young entrepreneur in Singapore, should you stay in Singapore and try to make a company here, or should you go somewhere else where maybe you see other opportunities, or maybe you put your local knowledge to the test?
It's a super hard question because that's the question of scalability. In Kenya, for instance, you have about 5 ethnic groups with each their own languages. Roughly, they're all about like 20% each of the population. So even in one market, it means that for one startup, it's super hard to scale. So they don't even think of moving to Nigeria, which would be the like obvious big one in Africa. Their objective is, okay, let's compare first the local market because it's already, a mess. And if we talk of Indonesia, of course, it's even more crazy. You have like, I don't know how many languages, islands, people. I would advise, of course, people to travel a lot, and you have a few programs where people are incubated and they move in the meantime. So I don't know if you've heard about Unreasonable at Sea. It's a startup program. They take a boat and they just stay together for 3 months, and they have about, I think, 20 stops during their trip. That's quite amazing because then they connect to each of the ecosystems, but then after, honestly, I don't see them having one representative or one office or one branch in every country. It's too costly. So I think it's a very tough question. I think Singapore is a very small market, even if it's a super good base to go into the other places in the region. But unfortunately, when you go to Jakarta, when you go to KL, when you go to any other country, you don't see so much Singaporeans in these countries with their startups. I had a chat a few days ago with the guy from the innovation lab at Coke. So they have an office here, and he told me that he was interviewing a few people to join, and each time the issue he has was people who were pitching for a startup in Singapore. It may make sense, but honestly, it's like super small. It's 5 million people, and when you just cross the strait. You have like 29 million people in Malaysia. You have like 250 million in Indonesia. So, very tough question. I don't know if it gives answers and piece of discussion.
I think on the beginning, you must be local, where you trying to solve the problems. And also, at my city, I have enough information in my city, so I need to stay in my city to solve the problems that I know. There's a good case of a startup in Brazil. It's called Easy Taxi. I don't know if you guys know about it. Up Global, it's an organization that is doing a pretty good job in Brazil. They do the Startup Weekend. You know about Startup Weekend program? So Easy Taxi in 2012, they started the idea of Easy Taxi. It's like Grab Taxi here. And they won the Startup Weekend. 2 years later, they focused on the city that they were living. 2 years later, they raised more than $20 million of investment. $20 million, just focusing where they were. Now they are in 27 countries in the world. So, in the beginning, in my opinion, you should stay local. When it's time to get traction, you expand so outside your city or country.
I just want to add into that. I think it's two different questions. It's an ecosystem question and then a marketing question. I think doing a startup is hard enough as it is. To be in a city that doesn't understand entrepreneurship, I think that's a big challenge. Yeah. When you come to Singapore, whatever we've been saying, but I feel it. You feel it here, right? Everybody's in the same boat. It's really good that you're together and you can grow it. If you go to some country where nobody understands what you're talking about, it's hard enough. You don't want to bang your head against the wall and try to talk to people. It's a serious downer. All right. So if that country is also not the same place as your market, you're going to have a challenge for sure. But if it's Singapore where you grow and you take your product into Indonesia, then that's where you have to play. You're going to be living on an airplane. Hey, that's part of the job, right? But I definitely think that ecosystem is very important, right? Hey, I see Tina up here growing the ecosystem in the Philippines. She should be on the stage right now as well talking about this because that is a hugely passionate market that needs somebody to pull them all together and then show them that, things can be done. And you're all in it together. I think that's one of the main things. And then look at the market secondary.
I'll try to answer it differently. It might be a little bit controversial, but I think this is a wrong question because actually building a successful startup is very difficult. It's a complex thing. So rather than being opportunistic and find a better place which has better support, the answer is going to be, of course, you should work on the place where you can excel. For example, it can differ actually. If you have some certain technology, this might apply in this country, this might not apply in this country. So rather than thinking of other ecosystems, the best way is if you can excel in that country. Because competitors are going to come definitely. So even though you were the first to the market, there are going to be competitors, sometimes with even more money. So you have to be at a place where you can excel. That's my answer.
I think it depends what market you're targeting, really. I think if you're targeting the US market and you've never been to the US, then how can you understand their problems and build their solutions? So if you want to solve a US market, then yeah, move to the US. But if you're trying to start in Asia and Southeast Asia specifically, then we have a problem of very fragmented populations, right? If you start a company in Malaysia, we have like nearly 30 million people, but that's not nearly enough. In Southeast Asia, we have almost 600 million people. So the key here is how do you then, you need to focus somewhere. How do you then start somewhere, grow and capture that market, and then go out and expand regionally? And that itself has problems. So I'm suggesting, hey, all the co-working spaces, we were talking about that earlier, let's all link up and let's all connect. We need to work together as Southeast Asia, or Asia, in fact, and link it all up so that when our entrepreneurs are ready, to grow outside of our local ecosystem, they have a space to go where there's a connector connecting them to the rest of their ecosystem so that they can learn quicker. And I think we do all have to work together we can't just be nationalistic and be all about Malaysia, all about Singapore and just close doors. We have to open up doors and work because we need each other in the region.
We have 16 seconds left. Any final thoughts anyone wants to share?
Yeah, I think Southeast Asia is just like Europe. You have a lot of countries, a lot of languages, a lot of differences. Not even talking about the currency issues. So I think there's just like 3 ecosystems in the world. You have the US, you have China, the 2 huge big markets, and then it's a fragmentation of smaller countries, and it's like super hard to think how you can scale across borders. Just like that. You have to have teams, you have to have funding, partners, and it's like super, super hard.
We're out of time. Sorry, guys. Thank you so much. It's fascinating, and thank you for the great questions.